respect to home invasions. And we're seeing reports, many reports coming out of home invasions, but we're also hearing suggestions about stronger laws for the enforcement of the current laws that exist as it relates to home invasions. The police service have informed Sean and I that home invasions falls under larceny. But this call for stronger laws, even a suggestion of stand your ground laws, what is your perspective of this?
So, yes, we don't have any, in Trinidad, we don't have a specific law on home invasion, which I believe is what the opposition leader is calling for. And my opinion on that is if they want to have a specific law on home invasion, that's fine. I am, however, a bit apprehensive about this concept of stand your ground and those sort of issues. We don't really, that's not really a term that is used in our law, stand your ground and, or the duty to retreat. We don't really have those laws. Our laws, as it relates, if somebody comes into your home and what you can do, really ties back with reasonableness. Our law says you can take any reasonable action that is necessary to defend yourself in the moment, okay? So my issue with stand your ground is what I am seeing coming out of America, where some states do have that sort of thing. It's not a federal law. There's some states who allow individuals to stand their ground. What the research that I have seen shows is that in those states, actually, there's an increase. There's been a 10% increase in murders. And what particularly bothers me is that there have been a lot of racially profiled or murders driven by racial profiling. Last week, a 14-year-old boy, Ralph, I think is his name, was shot in the face.
Ralph Yeri from
Yeri, or I was pronouncing Yal, but I'm not sure. He walked up to a door, rang a doorbell, looking for his twin brothers, and was shot. And these are the sort of things that happen in America, tied to that whole stand your ground, defend your property against all odds and that sort of thing. Now, I mentioned that to someone, and they told me, well, Trinidad, we don't have that racial problem. They don't see that happening. And I strongly disagree with that, because racial profiling is very strong.
Thank you very much. First of all, yes, you were correct, it's Ralph Yal. With respect to racial profiling, absolutely. And it's from every corner of Trinidad. It's not just confined to one particular ethnic group. I've seen it coming from every ethnic group. And I don't know why we choose to ignore it. I don't know why we choose to say it doesn't exist. It's something that we need to address. But I'm glad you raised this issue about standalone laws in the United States. Just in the last week, we've heard of at least three cases.
Exactly, and that is my concern. I think it sort of almost encourages vigilante justice. I mean, we can only think about Trayvon Martin. Now, he was not killed in his home, but it's a similar concept where citizens feel they have a right to protect their home and they go too far.
This is where I think the opposition leader needs to do a bit more research if she's going to borrow from the buzzwords of America. Because stand your ground, I believe, doesn't have anything to do with home defense. Stand your ground is literally, I could defend myself. I do not have to have a duty to retreat. And disengage from a scenario. If you want to come at me aggressively, right, well, you will get what you ask for, right?
Exactly.
But one could argue that, yes, they have a different culture that is separate. It's technically comes from, but it's separate to English common law with regards to self-defense and defense of your house and your right to bear arms and all of those things. And I think it's difficult to now bring concepts from American law into a commonwealth, a common law jurisdiction system. So,
but you know, in that regard as well, reasonable force, that term reasonable, it's subjective. Because is there a definition of what reasonable force is in our law books?
No, it really comes from the cases. We have cases like Beckford and the Queen. We have the case of, the guy was called Psycho, Stephen Robinson, and so those sort of cases where they've discussed the point of self-defense, and what they're basically saying is proportionate. Reasonable force means force that is proportionate to the attack that you think you're being subjected to. So the trial fact, which can be the jury, and now we have judge-alone trials, have to ask themselves, did this person genuinely have the belief that they needed to act in this way to defend themselves, and was their action reasonable, i.e. proportionate to the attack? So this whole thing about stand your ground, whether you could have retreated in the moment is one of the things you consider. So we don't say you have to retreat. We don't say you have to stand your ground. But we have to consider the circumstances of the situation that the person would have found themselves in. The law understands that in a moment of anguish, how they put it, people, you cannot measure with exact measure how to act in a moment because it's a moment of crisis.
Yeah.
But again, you're asking someone now sitting on the outside of the act, to think, I guess in a sense, put themselves in the person's shoes and see if what they did was act reasonably, i.e. proportionately.
What makes it difficult is you're trying to do in hindsight what someone has to do in the heat of the moment.
And the emotional factors.
Right.
Yeah,
but the flip side to that is also your perception could be skewed because when you have these stand your ground laws and when, to me, crime in America is heavy politicized, right? And that muddies the waters. And then now it makes the average or the reasonable person's judgment, depending on their political affiliation, it muddies that further. All right? Because they want to believe in the ideology of their side.
And it's not only political. Again, what I've read, they have said when the aggressor, so the person who shot or killed the other person, is white and they shoot a black person, they are like, the jurors are likely to let them off. If it was flipped, so the person who's killed is white, shot by a black person, they're more likely to find that the black person acted unreasonably. Well, they don't have that phrase, but they would find them guilty. They wouldn't see it as a matter of self-defense. And I'm just fearful that that sort of thing would creep in to our system. People would be judging it along those lines.
I don't think we are as bad as the United States, but I still believe that we are bad. In terms of standing your ground, I think this entire thing was raised over the issues of current gun licenses here in Trinidad and Tobago, and people wanting to protect themselves, protect their families, protect their homes. So the next avenue that we have to actually explore is, given the current state of affairs, what is the best way for you to defend yourself, to defend your home? Because it seems as though burglar proofing and alarms, I don't know.
They're cutting the burglar proof.
They're cutting everything.
Right. Yeah. Ironically, I don't necessarily see it as such a clear-cut thing as racism alone. I do think because of how the issues are, it is politically charged. And then there are a whole host of other cultural considerations. But I say that to say, I actually see where we could see very similar scenarios based on a lot of the similarities that we have with regards to gang crime, inner city crime, how we perceive who is criminal in society.
Who is criminal?
Because, listen, it's one thing to say, well, in America, non-blacks will racially profile blacks to be criminals. But in Trinidad, I have been told by my friends, so this is not my opinion, that Afro-Trinidadians could profile other Afro-Trinidadians as, well, they're probably a criminal.
Listen, I received a WhatsApp, and I think it was even on Facebook, where someone it was Canupia, they were taking still shots of a group of 4 young African men walking in a neighborhood. And it was just still shots, so I was just seeing them at different angles and saying, be on the lookout, these men in the neighborhood, the case in the place, and I'm like, I am just seeing a still shot of 4 men walking on a street.
Yeah.
And it was just spreading like wildfire that they were casing the place. And to me, we are tense. We are a very tense nation, and I can see descending very quickly.
But at the same time, a couple of things. One, I hear you what you're saying, but I don't necessarily fault the neighborhood, and I'll tell you why. Putting aside skin color for a moment, because that is a good example. I think if anyone was in a neighborhood and nobody recognizes them, even in instances where they have workers for construction sites, we haven't seen these construction workers before. They take photos, they circulate it on the community group chat. I think because of the current situation, everybody is now practicing that. I wouldn't necessarily say it is a racial thing in that sense, but I think it's anybody who's strange to the neighborhood, just out of an abundance of precaution, given what we're seeing and what people are experiencing. The second side of that, though, is, and I'm trying to get back to the idea of trying to defend yourself in terms of a home invasion. There was this notion, again, I'm not going to ignore it, I think we have to discuss it, that the majority of the home invasions that are taking place is in upper middle class neighborhoods. Valsin was one that was pointed out. Trinity. There are other communities, Arangwes, for example, as taking place all
Well,
over.
it would make sense.
But you don't hear. No, yes, it makes sense. But what somebody is pointing out, you never hear about robberies taking place, for example, in areas such as Morva, such as Laventille, no home invasions. And already the profiling has begun there. So you have to think as well. Could you?
But I mean, logically, it would make sense if you're invading a home.
Logically, you do. What it is being alluded to is that those are where the perpetrators are coming from. Like, even if you read it in the news, the individuals who were charged for the robberies in El Secor and Arangwes, East Port of Spain, Morval, Laventille. Thing is that without trying to push too much of a controversy here, because we still have to be careful, are we still trying to shy away from such facts? Are we still trying to push away that?
Shy away from which facts?
That facts in terms of what is being reported as perpetrators are coming from such areas. That in itself could not be perceived as racial profiling.
Right. Therein lies your rub, right? On some level, to what extent are you going to have confidence that it's professional statistics, and then you ask the question, well, if I see something, correlation, causation, I'm not going to say, well, it's a racial thing, that's why. Is it a geographic thing, or some other sort of demographic thing to say, well, this is happening frequently from area X?
Well, I think we shouldn't shy away. In the news, what I've been reading, yes, they are from certain urban communities, and I guess this comes back to the symposium. Why? Why is it coming from the community? Now, if you ask PM of St. Vincent and Grenadines, Ralph Gonzalez, he says because they're cowards, lazy, and driven by capitalism, and they have to mind pretty ladies. If you ask other individuals, we look at the socio-economic drivers of why people from certain areas behave or are susceptible to being involved in certain activities. So I'm not going to shy away from certain statistics at all. Okay, my problem with this is because let me give my example. I was thinking about this. This is why it bothers me so much. I have a young brother, right? When he was in his early 20s, he started to grow locks. And I was fearful. And I never said to anybody in my family, first time I'm saying it on national TV, why I didn't want him to grow locks. Because he basically essentially fit what people thought a criminal looked like. So he's young, dark, Negro, his hair in that stage was untidy. When he went out with certain friends who may look a certain way like him, I used to be fearful that if they were going somewhere casually like the beach, and they were going in a car with one of the friends who had, again, a car that was profiled as a car used for nefarious activities, that they would be stopped by the police, something could play off, or people would profile them. I actually used to be very happy to loan him my car, which was not a car that fit the profile, because I felt that they would be watched less. So that is where my fear comes from, that he could have been innocently targeted because of just how he looks. Thankfully, his hair has grown out, he's older, he has a wife, he has a child. I am less fearful. But there are other people who are like him or similar to him and say that they have been stigmatized. Yeah. They're always subjected to unnecessary scrutiny. And that can drive criminality as well, because if you see me a certain way, will I go and behave a certain way?
Because it's unfair.
It is unfair.
Very quickly, because we're more or less out of time.
Okay.
But the socio-economic factors, why has not this been addressed in these communities? Why hasn't
they would
this
argue
addressed?
this being addressed.
Right.
I see many counselors, I don't want to call a name, there are things going on in communities.
The second question is, why do you think, is it, and the argument has been made, crime is not because of anything else but vice. Crime is a choice.
Some would say that.
Right? But would you make that argument as well?
I would say it depends. And when I was in the symposium, they made a difference between those who are involved in crime as a business and crime for some way it's opportunistic. So if you are growing up in a certain, it's hard to fight what you see around you. If you're trying to be good, but you're poor, you have no money, and some fellas say, just come with me, like, just watch.
Or force you to.
Or force you, because some of them are forced. There are those who are susceptible because of certain factors, and there are those who, they just like it.
One thing though, I do find that we do need to look at the fact that, look, we're not the only place where we have like urban issues with regards to violence and gangs and so forth, and the states have it, and it's to some extent, it's a pattern that's repeated it's not an easy thing to solve, because if it was, then it would have been solved long before we even developed the problem to where it is now. So
yes and no. I mean,
the thing is, though, in TNT, we don't have a non-black majority and a black minority. So it causes us to have to now look at the thing differently, because ironically, we do still have issues with profiling, and it might be from people you just wouldn't expect to be profiling, as some people I know have experienced. But it exists, and it is not fair still.
It exists all around. It exists in the States, but I live in Trinidad and Tobago. And I could even make an argument that it has not been resolved because of a lack of political will. But that's for another topic, for another day. Janelle, thank you very much for your time and presence. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for bringing a perspective to Talking Point. Keep well.
Enjoy the holiday, guys.
You will as well. Don't worry. Get some rest and see you next week Friday.
You will enjoy it as much as you would have enjoyed any other Saturday. I'm pretty sure.